Okay, welcome everybody to our CPD event. Today I am really, really proud and privileged to welcome Andrew Taylor to our programme. Andrew, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah. Morning, Tracy. Thank you so much for inviting me along. Yeah, it's been an honour for me to be able to come and talk to your trainees, your ECTs, at the different stages of their career. So yeah, I am Andrew Taylor, and I probably am better known as being Mr. T from Mr. T's NQTs on Twitter. I do a lot of work on there supporting NQTs and ECTs as to kind of navigate that early part of their career. For me, I started back in early 2000s as an NQT myself, and I was really fortunate. I had an amazing mentor and a really supportive school and a supportive local authority. Got lots of investment as an NQT at that point. After 6 years of being a class teacher, I was offered the opportunity to become an NQT mentor at that point, and kind of snapped their arm off really, because I thought, wow, what an amazing kind of privileged role to have. I did that then for 10 years and worked with about 17 NQTs over that time, and found that it's such a rewarding aspect of what I did. I learned so much about the requirements for it, all the kind of the legalities of it, but also how to work with lots of different people, how to be able to get the best out of every individual that I work with. And I think that's one thing we need to be hold really clear to, is that every teacher, every trainee, every ECT will be different, and that's a really positive thing. So it's about working to find them the best ways to support them as an individual. So did that for 10 years, working with those NQTs, and got to that point where I'd been a deputy head then for about 6 years, and trying to decide where to go next with that career. And people were saying we should go for headship, but that looked just like a lot of paperwork to me, and that's not what I signed up for when I trained to teach. So explored about other things I enjoyed doing, and really enjoyed working with NQTs. So I thought, well, and supporting trainee teachers when they would come into us on placement. So I pursued down that avenue, and so now work at the University of Worcester. I've been there for 4 years now, and yeah, found that really rewarding, being able to work with teachers right at the start of their careers, being able to nurture them, being able to develop their uniqueness as a teacher, and then continue supporting them as an ECT at that point. I'm also a visiting fellow for the Ambition Institute to deliver lots of their ECF materials, clinics and conferences with them. So yeah, my career at the moment, or my role at the moment, is working a lot with those teachers at the start of their career, which I absolutely love.
Brilliant, brilliant. And yeah, I suppose just to plug at that point, obviously you are on Twitter at Mr. T's NQTs.
Yes.
I think it was 40,000 followers plus
Yes.
when I last checked. So if you haven't used this as a tool to support, it is absolutely invaluable. I know I occasionally help out there with a few answers, but it's a really good forum for people to ask for advice and to navigate what could potentially be a really challenging time. There's so much to learn, isn't there, as a teacher? Well, as a new teacher, but as a teacher as well. Andy, you've recently published a book called "You Got This: Thriving as an Early Career Teacher with Mr. T." You've given a little point there,
little plug there.
The background. Yeah, great. Can I ask? I mean, you've spoken about you've had this kind of wide-ranging experience with new teachers. What prompted you to get into a position to write a book about all of that?
So I, as you said, working on Twitter, 40,000 followers, and Twitter. The work I did on Twitter kind of was a precursor almost to the book. When I was working as an NQT mentor, we'd often receive in teachers that had completed their NQT year, and I'd often have conversations about the support they received, or when they would come in, kind of look at kind of where they were in their progress, their trajectory, their career so far. And I found it was really hit and miss, the support that they'd received, and kind of was surprised almost that the other NQTs weren't receiving the same level of support that the NQTs I was working with were. And then started to unpick this. So I thought, well, I'll set up the Twitter account and see, actually, is this the same picture kind of more nationally, that there is this sort of without want a better word, a postcode lottery of basically where you're placed affecting the experience you received. And yeah, it kind of just exploded over the first 6 months. Got up to about 3,000 followers in the first 6 months, and then it just seemed to just continue to build and build and build. When we went into lockdown, there was a particular burst at that point, because I think there was lots of uncertainty around about how things were going to look. And so yeah, it just exploded, and then that gave me the opportunity then to work along with Bloomsbury to write the book. And the book is kind of that, I can only do so much with the 158 characters on Twitter. The book was that ability to kind of expand on things a little bit, and I kind of wanted it to almost represent like having an NQ or an ECT mentor in your pocket. So if you had those questions, and sometimes as somebody at the start of their career, you can often worry about asking certain questions because you think it's going to make you look bad, and there's going to be some sort of judgment made against you for asking those sorts of questions. Never worry about that, by the way. Always ask the question. But I wanted to a safe space for people to come and ask questions, which I do on Twitter, but also then through the book, that the answers are there and I can expand on them and go into a bit more depth about kind of the why that's relevant. Sometimes on Twitter I can do this is what you need to do, but sometimes the why bit gets lost, so that understanding doesn't always translate. So that's the book's allowed me to do that. It also allows me to cover a wide range of areas, and the structure of the book was written so it's partially chronological, so it does help build through that year, starting off with how to secure your job, then how to set up, and then things like managing workload really early on in there, but then also building up other things as well. So when you've got parents' evenings coming up, there's a chapter in there about working with parents. If you've got pupil progress meetings coming up, or your first data drop, there's a chapter in there to support you with data, but also assessment strategies as well, and how you manage and support pupils on a day-to-day basis, but also how you use that summative assessment as well. So so that's kind of where it got to, really. And that opportunity, like I said, just to be that mentor in somebody's pocket or in somebody's cupboard. If they need to ask those questions, it's there to support them.
Yeah. And I think perhaps coming back to something that you earlier mentioned about asking the questions during this time, like I think I've spoken to you before and said I was the person that didn't ask those questions. When you're in a school full of people with lots of expertise and lots of experience that you don't have, there's a need to be, or at least to seem competent, to know what you're doing, and therefore sometimes to ask for that help or to look vulnerable in that position was a real challenge. I found that really difficult in my training year, and as a result I've looked at this as obviously as an experienced teacher and now leading CPD, and thinking what an invaluable resource for somebody who might have been in the same position as I was, who wouldn't be perhaps brave enough or bold enough to ask those questions, or didn't want to shatter the illusion that you're the expert and you know what's going on. But so really, really valuable. I totally agree. Having read the book, it is like having a mentor in your pocket. The way that it's phrased, it feels like a conversation, a really supportive conversation between two professionals. So absolutely brilliant. Okay, so remainder of our kind of interview today, we're going to look at a couple of strands and take a couple of strands from the book, and perhaps to talk around them in a little bit more depth and detail. The first one I think is probably most pertinent to colleagues joining the profession. We can't see many headlines without this issue of workload for teachers. That becomes, I think, magnified when you get to people at the start of their career where things take longer. It takes longer to plan. You can't necessarily do the shortcutting that you would a little bit later in your career when you've got those kind of defined mental models. Can you talk to us a little bit about how new teachers might cope with the workload that is there, and what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. Workload is one of those things that I've noticed in my career, the increase in expectations for teacher workload and how that has kind of shaped where we are now. And you're right, you can't open a newspaper without somewhere being teacher workload being mentioned. I think there's lots of things that, you can do to support yourself kind of even before you start kind of teach. I think there's that acknowledgement that right at the start of your year, everything is going to take you a little bit longer, and that's okay. You don't panic about that. It is going to take you longer. And I always reflect at this point in the year, so we're recording this in the summer, that trainees that I'm working with now, when they started in September, October, and they were planning that first lesson, it was taking them almost like 3 hours to plan one lesson, and now it's taking them 3 hours to plan a week's worth of lessons. But there is that developmental curve that you have to kind of work your way through, and sometimes that can feel quite overwhelming because it is taking you a long time, and there are lots of things you don't know. There are lots of things that you are unaware of, and again, that's okay that you don't know those things. It's about asking those questions and knowing where to go for support. So simple things. So as you are stepping out from that training where you've got that really kind of tight support around you into your ECT year, where that support is still there, but it probably feels slightly less kind of on top of you, if that makes sense, you know, kind of less kind of surrounded by that bubble of university and or your training provider and school around you, into just being supported by the school in that way. So start by looking really carefully at the systems that the school want you to engage with. Sometimes I've worked with ECTs before, NQTs before, and they've been, you know, they've got quite bogged down with things. Okay, well, talk to me. What are you doing? And they go, oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. And I'm like, why are you doing that? I thought I had to do that. So I'm like,
Yeah.
why did you think you had to do that? Well, that's what I did at my last school. I was like, you don't have to do that here. And sometimes it's just that being really clear about what the expectations are. And that's something that, you know, have that conversation with your induction tutor or your mentor really on, you know, what are the, look at the policies. Okay, so the marking policy says 50% in detail. What does that detail look like? Can it be live marking and feedback in the lesson? Can it be captured that? Is that acceptable? To try and make sure that you're managing things as carefully as you can. As you step into things, you'll start to work in the systems, and it's trying to find those ways of working smart and not hard, and work alongside colleagues. If you're finding something that's taking you longer than you possibly think it should, or longer than you want to give it for the nature of its impact on pupils' learning, have that conversation with your peers and say things like, look, it's taking me like 4 hours to mark these writing books every night. What am I doing wrong? And then they can talk you through, okay, well, actually, no, a bit too much detail here, kind of stick that back a little bit, really focus on this, and having those opportunities to have those conversations. And I think it's not worrying about those conversations, because sometimes we want to do, as teachers, often we are perfectionists. We want to do the absolute best we can for the pupils, and sometimes then that can become a bit all consuming. So it's being able to kind of think, actually, no, I've done enough to give them really good feedback. I could spend another 5 minutes on that piece of writing, but do you know what, there's enough there for them to be working on. I'm going to step away from that and I'm going to move on to the next one. That enough is good enough at certain points.
I think just building on a couple of things that you've mentioned there, that idea of how much time things are taking as well. I think as teachers, sometimes we suffer from the curse of perfectionism as well. We, you know, we want everything to look absolutely perfect, but using being strict with some of those timings can sometimes be a beneficial thing. You know, I'm going to dedicate an hour and a half to this because I know it's going to have X, Y, and Z on, or whatever impact on the pupils. And another thing I think is that I've felt, and this is years ago, obviously, as a trainee teacher, but I felt I needed to do everything from scratch. You know, I felt like my resources needed to be my resources. And there was real value in actually seeing what was out there and adapting what was out there. But I had a real, you know, a real crisis in terms of doing that, because I didn't feel comfortable to take somebody else's ideas or things and adapt them. I just wanted it to be fresh. Is that a common problem, or is that, you know, people do that?
It is. And I remember I was talking to a colleague the other day, and we were talking about this, the way that kind of teaching is now, that you are, as a teacher, you are teaching the same objectives in your year 2 class as another year 2 class 50 miles away. And actually, why would you both reinvent the wheel almost? You know, utilizing that support. And, you know, when I first started, there was the internet there. I'm not quite that old, but the internet was not a source of resources in the way it is now. You know, people share very freely what they do now. Utilize those, and there may be things that you need to adapt for your group of pupils in in your classroom that you're working with. But actually, the core bones of it, that actually you're teaching this, and you're trying to cover the same objective. You just need to think, okay, how can I make what they're doing, because that's a really great idea, and I think that would really achieve the objective I'm looking to do. How can I make it work for my pupils? Because like you said, there's no point in reinventing the wheel. What you just need to do is to make sure that the car you're attaching the wheels to fits the needs of your pupils that you're working with. So absolutely draw on those wider resources to support you. And when you are looking to plan over the week, that's the other thing. And you talked about, Tracy, you were talking about kind of giving it time. So over the week, there will be things outside of the teaching that's going to take away from your time. So you have staff meeting night, you might run an extracurricular activity, an after school club. Those nights, be kind to yourself. So when you're planning your week, think, right, Wednesday night, staff meeting night. I don't want to be having, you know, finishing off a final piece of writing on that day when I'm going to need to give feedback on it. structure your week so you can kind of plan around those, so you can be flexible and accommodate for that. Equally, if you do know on one day, talking potentially more to primary colleagues, but secondary as well, if you've got a piece of writing that's going to be needing quite an intense mark on one day, be kind to yourself and plan other activities that day that the pupils can peer assess, or that are more practical, that don't necessarily have a written outcome to them, but still, allow pupils to meet that objective. So you're not creating this kind of bottleneck at one point in the week where everything happens, and then you've got other days when there's nothing going on. Try and spread and pace yourself.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing to think about across the whole year as well. So for secondary college, so all of our schools in our trust are secondary schools currently, and there will be pinch points. Those mock exam moments, there are those internal assessment moments, and it's, I suppose, having that overview, having the ability to stand on the balcony rather than being on the dance floor moment, isn't it? It's like looking at the bigger picture. What does that really look like for the school year, and where do I know that that's going to be a pinch point? Like you say, being kind to yourself during that time. I think one of the things that you've touched on there, which I know is something that is focused on in the book as well, in supporting workload, actually there's real benefits to collaborative working and to collaboration. And we all know that it's a good idea to collaborate with each other, but we don't always necessarily do it as successfully as we could. So, like you say, drawing on those networks, the ECT network that's online, obviously trust-wide ECT networks, but also your subject networks as well that exist nationally, who can offer some real support. But like you say, I think that when you mentioned in the book, the benefits of drawing on the expertise of people within your own school, having the courage to ask those questions actually can benefit you so greatly. Brilliant.
And just to follow on from that, and I think sometimes that in secondary, obviously you've got that subject kind of department that you would draw on for potentially support with, that subject knowledge or that teaching element. But for the wider school, there may be people that you get on really well with in other departments that can support you with those wider school kind of, not issues, but school kind of questions that you've got, then actually you may feel there's slightly less judgment going to come back from you in asking those questions about, I sat in a staff meeting and they used this acronym. What on earth does that mean? Because I have no idea. You might not, because schools have their own language, and if you may be coming to the end of your training now and be thinking about kind of next school position, and the school that you're in now may have one term for how they define a particularly potentially group of pupils, or the system they use for inputting data on, or whatever they define. That could be a completely different word in another school for exactly the same thing. And schools have their own secret language. And a colleague of mine once said this. She'd had to move around 3 or 4 different schools very early in her career, with relocating with her partner's work. And she said, every school I go into, it's like a different word. It takes me half a term to understand the terminology, which is just the same thing, but just called something different. So be kind to yourself and don't worry about saying, like, in a staff meeting, like, what does that actually mean? And then, because chances are you will know it, but it's just being labeled as something slightly different.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think drawing from that, we spoke a little bit then about teaching can be all consuming, and I think that is one of the challenges of the role. Like, one of the best the privileges of being in this profession is that you are a teacher. It's part of who you are. You don't just teach, it's part of who you are. And as a result of that, it's actually really difficult to draw the line, isn't it, between where your kind of personal life starts and how much this role and job seeps into that moment. I think I shared an analogy with you before. I remember being a new teacher and on a weekend being in IKEA and seeing really excitedly little pots that I could use to keep resources in my class, or I saw all of the colours of De Bono's thinking hats at one point as bathroom mats. I thought, this is really exciting. I could go and use it in my lessons. But I think I soon threw them away when I realised that had no impact on student learning. But I think it's just so important and so hard actually to look after your own well-being in all of this, because it can consume you. What sort of advice would you give, in terms of the well-being question? It's a huge focus for the profession as a whole, but especially for those new to their careers. How do we balance all of that at the same time?
Exactly. And I think that links really well to that workload kind of question we were talking about a minute ago, where we have got that that desire to give teaching everything we've got. And but it's being really disciplined and not letting teaching seep into every aspect of your life. So it's about, actually, do you know what, I've got 2 hours after school, I need to get this done. I'm going to do the thing that has the biggest impact on pupil learning for the next day. And do you know what, then once that's done, I'm going. And that's it. You know, sometimes that might be a deadline, sometimes it might be a block of time. And once you've done that, that's it. If you've got, you know, if you give yourself a block of time, you've got then 20 minutes left at the end, then do those little extra things, those nice to do jobs, those little extras, but try and get the thing that has the most impact on pupil learning done first. And blocking your time can be really important as well for balancing your well-being, because if you've blocked that time, you can leave at that point and think, actually, no, I've fulfilled that time, I've done enough. And then it allows you to switch off a little bit, because you're right, it is a bit all consuming, and you're often thinking about your pupils, or you might spot something that, you know, you think, oh, that would really engage this pupil here, and that's great. But it's also about blocking that time for you and prioritizing that time without feeling guilty, because I think that's the bit that gets us as teachers. You know, we could be sat watching a film halfway through thinking, oh, I could be marking that, could be doing this, and you think, actually, no, you know, this is time for me. And actually that is the most effective use of that time. As a teacher, you are the most valuable resource in the classroom. You need to be working at your full capacity. So giving yourself time to rest, recover, to replenish, doing things that you enjoy is hugely beneficial to you, and therefore beneficial to your pupils in the long term as well. Some things I would suggest is that you block time to do things. If you can, do something that's social. So actually you're going to let people down if you don't go. Sometimes it can be, if you're going to the gym, particularly on your own, you want to go swimming and actually think, oh, I probably need to get this done. If it's just you going, there's no wider impact. But actually, if you're going to play a team game or something, you're playing doubles in tennis, think, well, actually, if I don't go, they're not going to be able to do it without me. It's that extra push to do it, because you will enjoy it. It will give you that chance to switch off, but sometimes we just need that extra little nudge to do it. I also advocate, where possible, to socialise with non-teachers. In the book, I refer to a group of teachers. I think the collective noun for a group of teachers would be a moan of teachers. Because when we get together with other teachers, my wife is not a teacher, and it drives her mad, because when I get with other teachers, it does dictate the conversation. Absolutely. Yeah. We're talking about how, you know, the state of the education, all these different bits, you know, wider things that are going on, the class that you've got, interesting pupils, and you never really switch off. Whereas when I'm out with my friends who aren't teachers, like, what are you on about? And they just kind of shut it down straight away. It's like, oh, okay, fair enough, and we're off we go. So it is, sometimes that can just give you that extra layer of kind of switching off to protect yourself. During this, go on.
Oh, sorry, no. I think that's so important to get context, isn't it? Like the wider context. So, and I always felt, I don't know if you felt the same, but as a teacher, if I was ever out of school, you know, on a course or something during the day, it felt really bizarre that there was a world happening. And people were just going about their normal day-to-day stuff, because to me, the world was in that school, and that was all consuming. That was the place where we were at. And so actually having friends or family members, or, you know, members of your community that you can draw upon, that give you a context that is, look, you know, if that it doesn't happen, it's not a life or death moment. Actually, it might feel like it in school, but it's not. I mean, it's something that I've struggled with for years. Maybe probably because I didn't have the book to tell me otherwise. But you know, that having that moment where you find your flow, where you are thinking about and completely absorbed by something else, is I would say the most powerful thing, because it makes you a better teacher. And you don't think it at the time, because you think, well, I've got X, Y, and Z to do, and I've got a bulging to-do list of all of these things. But actually, once you can fully escape, it really does support you and makes you a better teacher. And that's the thing. And like you say, it can be anything, can't it? I always used to tell my students I'd signed up for a level 1 plastering course. They found it hilarious, you know. I'm the teacher who used to plaster, but it was that for me, that was a little hobby that I did on the side, a 10-week course, and actually gave me a really good story to tell to the students, but also gave me an energy that I wouldn't have got if I'd have carried on working. Your job's never done as a teacher, is it? And I think it's just got to come to terms with that. And manage it.
I agree, and I think teaching is one of those jobs that will take all the time that you give to it. So I think you have to be really careful not to give it all your time, to take those times back to do a plastering course or whatever it is that kind of, you know, just motivates you in a different way, to kind of to switch off from it and engage in different things. And I think during the day we can also find time to do that as well in the school day. I often talk about school being a teacher sometimes actually can be quite a lonely job. You're never really alone, but sometimes you can be the only adult in that room, and you don't get that same level of interaction. So going to have a cup of tea and a biscuit with a colleague, or in the staff room, or that can actually be really positive use of your time. And I know it feels sometimes like you're not getting your to-do list done, but that time just to relax, to have a laugh, really release all those endorphins that we get from laughter and sharing and connecting with others. Again, it makes you a better teacher back in the classroom. You could become out with a more positive mindset and mind frame. And also, who doesn't enjoy a cup of tea and a biscuit when they're when they can.
Exactly.
And it's
Yeah.
about taking those times to stop and rest sometimes before just ploughing on regardless, because actually
Yes.
that stop and rest time gives you the energy to be able to continue afterwards.
Absolutely. And like you say, there are moments in the school day, you've got to steal those moments,
Yeah.
away from the things that you think are the most important. But being in schools where staff have taken a walk around the field in the summer, a few of them at lunchtime, or might bring a picnic blanket whilst they're on duty, or
Yes.
whatever else. It's something that just gets you outside, actually, breathing fresh air, because we know how stale the air can get in a classroom, particularly after PE lessons.
Yeah.
So it's just so important to go out, breathe some fresh air, and have that time. And duties, I always felt, were my solace. Actually, again, having a chat to the children and being outside,
Yeah.
speaking to other colleagues as well, can be really, really powerful. But the
Very.
smashing advice there, and I know that's some advice that's echoed in the book, and obviously and furthered as well, what we were able to cover today. Okay, so we've probably got a range of different people watching this video today. So we've probably got colleagues who are just finishing ECT 2, are ready
Yeah.
ready to fly the ECT nest. We've got
Amazing.
colleagues who are ECT 1, and we've also got colleagues who are just about to sort of start their careers properly. What sort of advice would you give ahead of September for those groups of people?
I think for each kind of layer within that, so we'll start with those ECT2s, is you are getting ready now for that September. You can kind of tick off, for want of a better word, that ECT, as ECT is, that induction will be complete. And for this September, it's about reflecting on what have you gained from that? What's really working for you? Now, who are you as a teacher? I think the term early career teacher, I don't think you ever feel like a later career teacher, really, because you're always learning, you're always developing. And I think it's that sense of, yes, that formalized process of CPD has kind of gone, but it's how are you going to continue that momentum? What have you gained from those sessions that you've got? How has it shaped you to be teacher you are now? And what do you want to refine? What type of teacher do you want to be going forward? Because then that gives you time to really embed that, to think about, okay, how am I going to shape this and can continue my journey as a teacher? And it may be that for some people, you're thinking, actually, I feel ready then to take on kind of a subject responsibility, or kind of a deputy head of department. You might be thinking to look forward to that kind of next step in your career. For some people, it might be, actually, I just want to be, just continue to hone my craft in the classroom. And everybody is different, and we need that variety. Not everybody, as I gave an example, not everybody wants to be a head teacher. Everybody wants to, but everybody wants to be involved in that education system. So it's about finding now, kind of starting to think about what is it that you enjoy. You might enjoy more of the pastoral side of things rather than the subject side of things. So what other opportunities might you want to get more involved in the school? It's about having those conversations with your head of department or your line manager, deputy, depending on who you need to speak to about those things, and saying, I've done my induction year, I'm thinking about where I'm going, I want to continue developing as a teacher, but also I've got a real interest in this I'd like to nurture as well. And to get those opportunities just to kind of see what things that are going on, you'll continue to have an appraisal performance management cycle, and part of that is about supporting you to develop in your career. So utilize that really carefully to move you forward. As an ECT1, you're kind of still in it, still developing. And this year you probably will have made a lot of mistakes. If you haven't, then I'd be amazed, because, and I still make mistakes now, and I'm years into my career. And you because you're trying things out all the time. And actually, if you're not making mistakes, you're kind of probably playing a bit too safe. You need to kind of push it a little bit, because again, thinking about what those ECT2s are now, they've been through it and they're starting to formalize who they are as a teacher. So you need that chance to explore that with the safety of the support around you as you continue in that ECT induction period, that you can continue to try things out, take risks, make those mistakes, reflect on them, learn from them, move them on, and it will help shape you as a teacher. And you'll become a stronger teacher for doing those rather than playing it safe. So go
Yeah.
for it, because and it's almost more exciting as well, to think like, oh, I'm going to give this a go today. If it goes wrong, as I often think, actually, a bad day in the office for me, I could reteach it the next day. It's not the end of the world. So just always put that perspective in it. If it doesn't go well, reflect on it, move it forward for next time. You can always reteach something. It's never lost. It's never gone.
Yeah.
So always move it forward in that way.
Can I just, can I suppose interject to that point for those ECT ones and twos probably? I suppose one of the criticisms sometimes of this program is that it won't necessarily, the clinics won't necessarily meet a need that you have at that particular moment in your
Yes.
journey. And that's what's difficult about this. You can't, there's not a kind of clear trajectory of when you're going to experience the things you're going to experience as a
No.
teacher, because schools are very different, landscapes very different, and that's one of the challenges of that program. And I suppose the key then is, whenever you do have those opportunities for clinics, knowing that whilst this knowledge I might not be on my plate at the moment, it will be certainly at some point, and getting the most out
Yes.
of that at that time. So a really good thing I would suggest doing at the end of ECT1 is, how do you collate that
Yeah.
information that you've learned to think, I've got that tool in my armory for when I need it. It might not be now, it might not be next year, it might not even be the year after, but at some point it's gonna crop up. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I suppose that consolidation is so important at the end of that first year, isn't it?
It is, and it's about that opportunity. I think whenever you get to the end of the year, it's like that chance to reflect, as you said, what have I learned this year? What have I gained? What skills have I used? What haven't I used? And you probably, as an ECT1, you possibly started the start of the year, right, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. And it's just that time to reflect and think, actually, how much of that have I maintained? What's kind of gone? What's changed? What's different that I do now? And I think every year I kind of curated those kind of strategies that were actually, which ones haven't I used this year? Actually, let's not worry about those anymore. Which ones have I used really effectively? Which ones do I want to develop even further? You kind of, yeah, it's that sensitive, like you said, it's about thinking, what have I gained? Which ones might come up that I still might need to use, or which ones actually that really didn't make the impact I was hoping it for. Let's just park that for now, but it's
Yeah,
there if I need it
yeah,
to come back to. And so often, and this is for those who potentially about to finish their training, about to step into their ECT1, you will start with lots of ideas about what you want your room to be like, what your strategies you're going to use, and all those things. And it's about being really mindful that every strategy and system you put in place needs maintenance. So try and find those strategies and systems that need the least maintenance but have the highest impact, or that you can train the pupils to take ownership of. So you might want to have a particular display with kind of key questions on, or key ideas, or as you're developing, as you're having the conversation, as you're teaching, right, this is a key idea. Ask one of the pupils to write it down, and then get them to put it up on the board. They've then got ownership of it, but also it's removing your workload as well. So you can maintain those systems going forward. But equally, like I said, take those risks, try things out, see what works for you, but don't feel you have to chuck everything and the kitchen sink at your classroom or what you want to do at the start, because you won't be able to maintain it. And I
yeah,
think it's just that's okay. And it even may be that you want to start, actually, I'm going to start with start simple, and I'm going to add to it as the year goes on, because that first half term, there is a very steep learning curve when you step into your new school. That learning curve of learning people, learning systems, learning routines, learning the pupils that you've got there, learning the pupils' needs, learning the curriculum that you might need to turn, because you may be different exam boards, all those different things that can change. There's a very steep learning curve, and you've got the skills you need to be able to do that. But I think it's that acceptance that that first half term is going to be like running uphill on a treadmill a little bit at times, with the amount of knowledge that you are gaining, and that's exhausting for your brain. And then that has that physical kind of exhaustion side of it too. But it's just that accepting that that's going to happen, and that is okay. So make sure, linking back to the workload side of things earlier, that you can try and protect yourself both physically and mentally as you can going into that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know that point you've just made about maintenance? I think it's just so important, and something I hadn't actually thought of before. Just sat here thinking and reflecting on my own career. I was exactly that, and then, so there were some things I was so excited by because, oh, this is going to change everything in my lesson, the panacea to fix all the issues. And then 2 weeks later, I'm onto something else, and I'm onto something else, and I'm onto something else. And actually, that I think one of the key threads of this conversation has been, what would the impact be on the students? If I'm doing
Yes.
this, coming back to my bathroom mats in those classrooms, what was the impact for the amount of time that I dedicated to that? Actually, probably very little.
Yeah.
And so, having that as your filter, I think, is a really, really powerful thing. But also, like you say, being mindful about, if you do introduce this thing, whatever it is, it might be a way of working, something that you're using in your classrooms, or, whatever, what level of maintenance is that going to need? And that, because that maintenance needs that check as well. What impact is this going to have on the pupils'
Yeah.
learning? Yeah, really
Absolutely.
powerful.
Completely agree. And I think marking is one of those ones that for me or often sits out in my head. We, as at the school, we introduced about 10 years ago now, this triple marking that, you marked positives in one color, negatives in another. There had to be a question for the pupils that they had to then respond to, and there was a lot of effort involved in there. And what we found, because that's what we found we should be doing, because there was this message that came out that this is how outstanding schools do it. So that's what we found we
Yeah.
needed to do in order to do this. But there was a lot of effort going in, but we found the pupils were still making the same mistakes over and over again. And it's that learning curve of almost actually just spotting them doing it in that moment, saying, right, why are you doing that? This is what you need to do instead. That made the impact.
Exactly. Not hours on a Sunday night
No,
poring over loads and loads of books. Yeah. It's interesting, but yeah, the whole class marking thing was a revelation for everybody, wasn't it?
yeah,
Or symbol marking was like, oh, look how much time we've wasted. And you kick yourself almost, because you think, I've been doing this for years and
yeah,
we've never really challenged it. So I think, what you're touching on there is the idea of professional skepticism, isn't it? When
it
you're
is.
presented with something that can fix all of the ills of a classroom, really checking and diagnosing properly whether that is what's needed or not.
Exactly. And I think linking back to what we were saying earlier, as an ECT2 now, you might be able to, you've probably got a voice now that can start to influence change a little bit more, so start to recognize those things that possibly, and just asking sometimes the question, why? And
Yeah.
I remember, I was a leader at the time, I was a deputy head, we were talking about things that we're doing, and it actually was an ECT. It said, well, can I just ask, well, why we're doing that? And I was like,
That's
it's
a
just
really good
because
question.
so we kind of always have done for the last 5 years. But why are we still doing it that way? It's because they'd seen it done in a different school, which was more
Yeah.
effective. You're like, yeah, that's a really good idea. And I think sometimes as a fresh pair of eyes on things, sometimes you can just ask that why, and there may be a really legitimate reason behind it. It's like, well, actually, this is why. And sometimes once you've got that understanding, say, okay, fair enough. But yeah, sometimes just ask that why question, because it may be that that you're in a department that's been established for about 20 years, that's just the way it's always been done
Yeah.
in that department. Sometimes asking that why question can trigger off a whole list of changes, and that's at any stage of your career.
Yeah, yeah, no, 100%. I think being professionally curious, isn't it?
It
I
is,
suppose,
yes.
without without damaging all the systems and procedures that are in place in anyone's school. Yeah, don't do
Yeah.
that. But
No,
actually, yeah, there's real value in actually seeking people who've had very different experiences, and the best leaders will take that on board, listen to it, or even the fact that that question's been asked will be a prompt for some people, which is really
exactly.
beneficial.
I agree.
Brilliant. Okay, yeah. What about this other group then? Those trainees just finished their training year who are just about to start ECT1.
Yeah, so we touched on them a little bit. Like I said, just be mindful of the systems that you're going to put into place with that maintenance side of things. I think now at this point of the year, as you're coming towards the end of your training, when your training is finished, is if you've secured a job in your training school, great. You will know that school really well. You'll know the people in there. You'll get a good understanding of the systems, what to expect. If you haven't, for whatever reason, and you've secured a job somewhere else, find opportunities to go into a new school, because there will be policies on the website. You'll have reviewed the policies, part of your application form, to kind of get a good sense of the school. what policies look like on paper and what they look like in practice can be quite different. So find an opportunity, you know, voluntarily, if you can get paid for it, even better, but voluntarily to go into the school and see if you can shadow somebody in your department for the day. Spend time watching what they do, how the things look for them from what you've read in the policy. So how does the behaviour management policy look in practice? What does the marking or feedback policy look like in practice? What do their key teaching and learning policies look like in practice? So again, you're getting that sense of what it looks like. Also see if you can do a bit of a learning walk around the department as well, so you can see in every room there are these things, you know, these things are consistent in every room. So you know that if you have your own teaching room, I'm going to have these things in my room as well. And there may be those things that are absolutely consistent, that it has to look identical in every room, but actually there are these things that are in every room. It could be a key knowledge display, for example, that you've got, but actually it looks different in every room. So you can put your own spin on how that looks for you.
Yeah.
And then also when you're looking at that, doing a learning walk and you're seeing the policy, again, what part of the policies are absolute? So some schools will have very specific policies about even sentences you say when you're dealing with pupil discipline. I've noticed you doing this, you need to stop doing that now, and you need to do this instead. And that could be consistent and everybody uses that language. Equally, the warning system may be, there is a verbal warning, but actually that's not scripted in that way. So you can start to get a sense of what the school is like. Once you've kind of you're getting to know it, getting to know the school systems, get to know the people as well. You know, really make friends with as many of the school support team as you can, as much as the colleagues you're going to be teaching alongside. If you've got a group of TAs that work in the department, you know, speak to them, get to know them, get to know their strengths, what they like doing, what they're not so keen on doing, so you can maximize that relationship. School secretary, finance officer, they're the people who hold the keys to resources, and often and also with the receptionist is often your first line of defense against parents ringing in. If you can make that really positive relationship there, they can deflect a lot of things for you. And you know, it's not that it's only you're going to gain something from the relationship, you know, you can give back to them as well, but actually they can be your greatest asset, you know, when you're teaching, and particularly as a new teacher, you want that people that can kind of almost take some of the unknowns out for you. That if you've got that relationship, they will come and say, like, oh, I look, when you're doing the register, this is how it needs to be done. You know, when you're doing these things, this is how it needs to be done, rather than if you haven't potentially made that effort, that they just leave you to it, and then we'll happily come and tell you when you've done it wrong. So, you know, you've got to sort of kind of find that balance there of kind of getting to know the support staff as well, the school cook, because the day you might forget to pack your lunch, you might need a lunch sorted, or they may do very good lunches anyway. You may want to partake in those. It's all those things that you can do just to make the wider part of your job as easy as you can. And those relationships, I'm a very relationship driven person, and I talk about that a lot in the book and what I do on Twitter. Those relationships will guide you through and often make the difference between you being successful and being unsuccessful, because you've got that network around you. And linking back to well-being as well, I often talk about finding your tribe, finding those group of people that support you, that champion you, but also challenge you, but challenge you professionally. You don't want to create an echo chamber around you, like, oh yeah, you're the best, woo, because you need people to say, oh, have you tried doing it this way instead? You might find that more effective if you do this, because you need people to have those to push you, to make you professionally better. But equally, you want those people that you can do that in a very non-judgmental way with, that, you know, you support you and energize you about teaching. As we know, you know, teaching's often in the paper and never for positive reasons, and frustratingly so, because it is, as we know, a hugely rewarding job. And there are people you'll meet in school, and that will maybe, you know, radiators and drains, I often hear them call it, about people like that, or the mood hoover, the fun sponge, that who are just very down about things, and they will de-energize you about teaching. So find people who energize you, connect with, that can boost you up and kind of, yeah, give you that enthusiasm to kind of go back into your room and think, right, we're going to do this now, kids, come on, let's go.
Yeah, 100%. The find your tribe kind of mantra, I think, is so key, isn't it, for educationalists, full stop. But I just, you know, just to echo that point about relationships in the school, you all belong, and I think that's just such an important thing, that in those relationships, often you need to remove hierarchy, and it's about people. You know, so
Yes.
my mum, for example, was a school cleaner. She cleaned in a primary school for 15, 20 years. And she would always come home and tell me about the teachers that she'd engaged with that day. She'd say whether she liked them or not.
Yeah.
She'd say whether they spoke to her, whether they helped
Yes.
and they were considerate. So, you know, I remember her telling me once about a teacher who would see litter on the floor and step over it when my mum was in the room because must assumed that that was the way. Lo and behold, the cleaners were my best friends at school because I just
Yes.
thought, you know, well, lo and behold, I had the cleanest classroom in the school because I had a really strong relationship with those
Yeah.
cleaners. Same with the caretaker. You know, when my blinds were broken and I needed them to be fixed, I knew the caretaker really well. I knew which football team he supported, and we had a
Yeah.
chat and I made time for him. And I just think, like you say, those relationships
You
of,
do.
you know, really encompassing everybody in your school community, I would say is probably one of the most impactful things that you can do as a new person in an organization,
Yeah.
because it works. And, you know,
It
what's the
does.
harm in saying good morning and being nice to people and actually just asking how other people are? It's really,
Yeah.
really powerful.
You are absolutely right. And I remember I taught in reception for a couple of years, and at Christmas time, and if anybody's ever stepped in a reception classroom at Christmas time, it's just like a sea of
Glitter.
glitter. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I used to say to I used to get the kids to pick up all the kind of the big bits before the end of the day. I try and clean as much as I could around, but I just say to them, I'm really, really sorry. We've had the glitter out today. I've cleaned up as much as I can. They'd be like, oh, don't worry about it at all,
Yeah.
because you've got that. It's about investing in that relationship, that acknowledgement. You know, you're going to make their work at life a little bit harder at that moment in time, and just acknowledging that and taking a bit of ownership for that was never a problem. I had,
No.
again, similar to you, I had colleagues that didn't really value that relationship, and you know, their classrooms were never as tidy as mine, let's put it that way, you know,
Exactly.
as clean
Exactly.
as mine. So
Exactly.
you think, yeah,
And you know, just I think it just benefits everybody and actually models the best things for the students as well.
it
Because
does.
some of our students, I know we've gone off on a tangent about cleaners a little bit, but I think it's just so important. But some of our students are under the understanding that, well, it's somebody else's job to clean up my
Yeah.
mess. You know, I've made the mess on the floor, but somebody else gets paid to do it. But actually, the quality of that person's work would be even greater if they didn't have to do the stuff that we could fix already.
Yes,
So, you know, if you are lucky enough to have your own classroom, that is just top tip number one from
it
both of
is.
us, I think,
Yes,
is
definitely.
just make sure that you are best mates with the cleaner and just make their job as easy as possible. Um,
Exactly. And it's again linking to that maintenance side of things. Even if you get the pupils to do it, the last class of the day that you've got in that room, right? Nobody's leaving this room until they picked up 5 bits of rubbish off this
yes,
floor and put it in
yeah,
the bin.
yeah,
Again, you don't have to do it all yourself, but you put in those systems in place that, you know, make your life easier. As you said, make the cleaner's life easier, and it just creates a far more positive working environment to be in.
amazing. Yeah, that's really really solid advice. You know, I think would be really worthwhile for lots of colleagues. I know we're going over time a little bit, so we'll keep this little one short. I could talk to you all day, Andy.
Absolutely.
Um, just I think we've spoken a little bit about this, but maybe just to touch on to summarize, you know, people will be thinking now, sort of longer term, maybe, you
Yeah.
know, if I always think when you used to ask year sevens, you know, what do you want to do when you're older? Oh, I want to be a brain surgeon, miss. We kind of have these aspirations for the future. What advice would you give about setting career goals for new teachers?
I think, and you're right, we did touch on this earlier when we talked about ECT2s and their next steps. I think some of you will, wherever you are, will be coming in with that clear vision of, you know, I want to be ahead in 10 years' time. And absolutely, you know, that's a really clear path. And it's about then carving out those opportunities. So actually, if you want to be ahead in 10 years' time, you need to have a good spell as a deputy. So actually, when do you want to be a deputy mind? What things do you need to put in place to make sure that's happening, you know, to being head of department initially, so you can start to gain those people leadership skills. So it's about how you can carve those opportunities out. So conversations with your line manager, your performance manager, whoever, you know, can help you, give you those opportunities to start developing those skills. Also, there's that additional CPD, and I know we've spoken about workload and well-being, but equally, if there is something you particularly want to pursue, and it may be you've got particular passion about SEND and you want to bring a Senko, that cover that conversation with your head teacher about supporting with the Senko qualification. And again, that is additional workload because it's on top of your day job. But if it's something that you're passionate about, actually engaging with learning opportunities is actually a positive sign for a positive strategy for developing well-being, because you'll continue to learn, you're helping your brain focus on different things, and it can be very replenishing for you to focus on learning opportunities. So it's about carving out those opportunities. Equally, you may be at the position where you think, I just want to be a really good teacher, and that's what I want to focus on. So it's about, well, what part of your practice do you want to develop? You know, where are you now? What do you want to develop? What CPD opportunities are there that you want to kind of to seek out to continue to develop? Are there colleagues that you're aware of using a very different strategy in a different department, you know, opportunities to go and see them that you can then embed into your practice? So it's about, I suppose, identifying, you know, that short-term goal. Where do I want to be in a couple of years' time? And what things do I need to do to put in place to start to do that? And I think as a trainee, you might already have that understanding of, like I said, being ahead in 10 years' time, or actually, I really have an interest in SEND. I'd like to be the SENCO. But equally, for some of you may think, actually, I don't really know. It's thinking about what you enjoy at this moment in time. Well, actually, I'm really enjoying my teaching, or there may be, I'm enjoying the pastoral side of things. So actually, how can I move? What things might I need to do to move towards that pastoral aspect of the school? And again, finding those opportunities to engage in those wider things. And I think my biggest piece of advice is don't rush it. Give yourself time. If you don't know where you want to be in 10 years' time, great. I didn't either. I didn't set out with a plan at all. And I very much followed what I enjoyed, because then if you enjoy it, you're more likely to kind of keep at it and pursue it, rather than that sense of doing something because you think there's a social expectation of, oh, I've got to be, you know, if I'm not ahead in 10 years, people are going to think I've failed in my career. Because, you know, teaching is a long career. You know, you probably, most people, if you come into it kind of, you've done your degree, you've done your PGCE, you've got 40 years of that career, realistically. Possibly slightly longer for some of you, if you're, because retirement age slowly keeps moving out of reach for me at the moment. But you've got 40 years. That's plenty of time to be able to give that opportunities to really explore different things. And you know, we're aware of the retention figures of teaching, that within 5 years that 30% of teachers have gone within the first 5 years. And the best thing we can do is to actually just go with what you enjoy. Don't feel that pressure, because as soon as you start to build that pressure up, you know, it's harder then to get rid of that pressure. Whereas taking it easy, taking your time, what am I enjoying now? That's what I want to focus on, moving that forward slowly. And if other opportunities come along and they feel right, go for them. But equally, if you're just enjoying where you are at the moment, there's nothing wrong with that. You've got another 30, 40 years ahead of you in your career. Pace yourself, give yourself that time to do what you're enjoying at the moment.
Absolutely. I think that's just really solid and sensible advice. I think one of the things that you kind of touched on there is this idea of key milestones and celebrating those milestones as well. So some advice I was given it wasn't until I got to leadership that somebody said this, but I wish I'd have done it sooner, was to just keep a timeline of the things that I'd done, these milestones that I'd hit. You know, the first assembly, the first time I presented to the staff, the first time I've run, I don't know, shot put on the sports day. You know, there's all sorts of these things that are going to characterize your career in education, and you will forget them so easily because of the busyness of the day to day. So yeah, just kind of highlighting those milestones could be really, really great thing to look back on one day. You know, back in 23 when I did X, Y, and Z. It's really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really, really nice idea, because you're right. There's little moments that actually be quite defining moments, that it's just capturing those, and if potentially, if you know you're coming to the end of the second year and you might need to relocate for whatever reason, or you want to explore working in a different type of school environment, having that list of all those little milestones allows you to put that together as, oh, actually, you know, I've led this, I've done this, you know, I've delivered a whole school assembly, I've done these things that again help you strengthen those things moving forward for future applications. But also, like you said, they're just nice things to think, yeah, look how far I've come. I've done that.
I was quite fortunate, but and I would probably recommend this as well. If I ever see ECTs doing something for the first time, I often take a little photograph for them and say, you know, and keep this, because in years to come, you'll be a different teacher. And actually looking back, there's real value in that, celebrating those memories of really special things that are happening in your career as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Andy, I think we probably need to go. I said to you I could talk to you all day, but
Absolutely, Tracy.
yeah,
It's been really a
yeah.
pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. And there's so much valuable advice here for teachers at the start of their careers or early career teachers. I would just end with an absolute recommendation that this book is like what we said earlier, an ECT mentor in your pocket. So if you do need any advice and you can't find that advice immediately, or even if on a Sunday afternoon you just want something to have a quick read through, this is just such a valuable book. So how can people get this, Andy? They just get it on.
Yeah, available in Bloomsbury. Other retailers are available as well, without promoting anybody in any group in particular. But yeah, lots through online booksellers. Yeah,
It's
get
easily
hold of it.
Googleable. So yeah,
It
you
is.
got this. Thriving as an early career teacher with Mr. T. And obviously give Mr. T a follow on Twitter as well for some more really invaluable advice. And thank you
Absolutely.
so much. Yeah.
No, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Tracy. And yeah, good luck to everybody.
Thank you very much.